What do all these games have in common? They might never come out. And my game is no different. Now I can't speak for those other games, but my game is just too overscoped. It's been 2 years, and it's not even a game yet. Part of my problem is I started with an overcomplicated idea, and I've made it more complicated since then. To get back on track, I have to start cutting things. Energy bar, get it out of here. Inventory, who needs that much space? Crafting menu. Wait, don't break that was a lot of work. For those of you who don't know, I'm making a robot survival farming base defense game. See why I say it's too complicated? So to simplify it down, I decided I should just focus mainly on the base defense, since the whole point of the game is you protecting a boy. Farming and survival are all secondary to that. But changing the scope of my game has some consequences. Everything I've already made will either need to be cut or reworked. So let's get into it. To get started, I made a backup, just in case deleting everything doesn't improve my game. There we go, now I can get started deleting. Starting with the inventory. Right now, the inventory is huge. But that was because I was making a survival game, so you would need a lot of space for all the useless things you pick up, like rocks, wood, rope, chloroform. Now when you open up your inventory, all that shows up is the 6 spaces you have. This is going to make inventory management much more important. Sorry Wood, you gotta go. You also might have noticed that the crafting menu is just gone. Don't worry, I wasn't kidding when I said it was too much work to cut. I actually repurposed it into a shop. So now when you interact with the house, instead of feeding the boy, you now give him scraps that he turns into cool items. Yep, everything is bought with scraps now. But scraps are also totally different. Instead of just being an item that the enemies drop that takes up your limited inventory slots, I added a tracker above the health bar to keep count of them, kinda like points in COD Zombies. I know the UI is ugly right now, but it works, so don't hate too much. I also made it so wood and rocks count as scraps too, so there's still a motive to cut them down besides expanding your base. Speaking of my base, I now made it always spawn at the center of the map. Before, I had it randomly spawn anywhere on the map so that you could explore it. But since this game isn't about exploring anymore, I can cut the map down to a manageable size. My first attempt at this looked really bad. I think it has something to do with the house flying away. However, once I got it grounded, it still looked too flat. So I added some terrain variation and some fog. It took me a few attempts to make this look right, but I think it's not too bad now. It'll still need some updates later, but I'm not going to get stuck on it too long. Instead, I worked on tweaking how obstacles spawn. I made it so most of the trees will spawn away from the house in a dense forest, but a few will get closer. This adds some nice variation to each attempt, and it gives you things you have to work around. And with the house finished, I started working on defending it. For those unaware, this scarecrow is actually a gun you load with ammo. To do this, you would just drag and drop the ammo into the scarecrow's inventory. But of course, since we changed how the inventory looks, this no longer fits. So I have to rework the whole thing. I started by adding text above it to display the amount of ammo currently loaded in it. I set this up similar to the health bar, so it always points at the camera. But now for the big change. The inventory is gone. Instead, you'll just run up to it and press E to load the ammo in. This is much faster than moving individual ammo between inventories. I set this up so every bullet you put in will equal 25 shots. Obviously, this is dumb, since you can just remove the scarecrow and get all the ammo out of it, essentially free ammo. So to counter this, I made a new item. Turret ammo. Very creative, I know. Which you can buy and load into the scarecrow. This will still add 25 bullets, so if you remove it, you basically just transfer turret ammo to real ammo, which I don't think should be a problem. And now I'm going to actually add something instead of just deleting things. After 2 years of development, I'm finally going to make a game loop. I want the gameplay to be round based, so you spend time setting up your base, and then a huge wave of enemies comes in to attack you. And once you beat them, you have to quickly reset your base before the next wave. So what better way to start than by creating a wave system to spawn the enemies around the map? I made it so that each wave spawns more enemies in and gives you more time in between the rounds to reset everything. Of course, this system will get more complex when I add different enemies, but for now it's perfect. To spawn the enemies where I wanted, I just put 4 points around the map and used 2 random numbers to get the distance from that point. Using 2 numbers will give you a nice bell curve distribution, so that the enemies will spawn more frequently close to the center, but can still spawn near the corners. Boring! What, that's just how it's made. Okay. Think about rolling 2 normal dice. Everyone likes dice, right? When you roll 2 dice, rolling a 12 is pretty rare, since you need both dice to be a 6. But rolling a 7 happens all the time, since there's multiple combinations for it. For the degenerates out there like me, this is why craps pays more if you roll 12 than it does for a 6, or why 6 and 8 are the best numbers in Catan. And if you haven't figured out why it's called a bell curve yet, it looks like a bell. Yep, they didn't have to get too creative with that one. Using this concept, I made a range from -30 to 30 and rolled it twice. So 0 is the most likely outcome, but sometimes 60 will happen, and sometimes -60. This gives the spawning enough variation, and I think it will play way better than if it was just completely random. And with this new spawning system, I had to completely change the enemy AI. When they were scattered across the world, I had them patrol areas, but now they just charge straight for the house, and will get distracted if you or a defense gets in their way. Or, literally any object. Yeah, they still need some work. But I don't want to get too far off the path again. This video isn't about them, so I'll get back to it later. Instead, I gave the house a health bar, so you can see how close to losing you are. I think this might become part of the UI later, but I really need to work on all the UI. While playtesting some, I ran into a problem where you can't really tell where the enemies are coming from. And not to pat myself on the back too much, but I'm pretty proud of my solution. Barns typically have wind vanes on their roof. The rooster arrow? What if instead of pointing at the direction of the wind, it just points at the closest enemy? It would blend into the world really well, and it'd be useful. I started by making an arrow to test it, and it works great. But I decided to save making it a wind vane for later, since I have some more ideas involving that. And you know what happens when I get ideas. Staying on track, I made the shop only open in between rounds. Better stock up on all the essentials before the round starts. I also made it so the defenses only heal when the round's over. This way you can't just have one defense doing everything and never die. Speaking of dying, I finally made it something you can do. Now when you or the house gets to 0 health, the world will just reset. Of course, this will be more in the final game, but for now, this makes it actually playable. And just like that, I can actually see a game forming. Deleting everything has really been a nice fresh start for this game. Hopefully I can keep this pace up and don't burn out. Okay, see you guys next time.